This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode 199. How you doing, Timothy? I hear you're a little under the weather. Little
Yeah, well,
what?
it was a Saturday and out of nowhere, it's like I get this sore throat, no big deal. And then by the evening, I was like, oh, something's coming on strong. And no COVID, but I was knocked out for multiple days, like really like some child, being sick when you're a child in school kind of shit. Like, Jesus, this thing's flooring me. Um,
Well,
I don't
I
know.
don't know if this was the reason why, but this article is kind of
Yep,
terrifying.
sure.
Clouds carry drug-resistant bacteria across distances.
Ooh,
A
okay.
team of Canadian and French researchers, for them, usually dark clouds on the horizon are potentially ominous, but not because they signal a storm, because they were found in a recent study to carry drug resistant bacteria over long distances. Now, these bacteria usually live on the surface of vegetation like leaves or in soil, but now they are being carried by the wind into the atmosphere and can travel long distances around the world at high altitudes in the clouds.
And was
Discovery
that
was published in last month's edition of the journal Science of the Total Environment. So
not
this to me,
happening previous? Like, what? Why would that? Why would that be a new thing?
well, no, they're confirming
Oh, they're
this new
confirming
because
it.
it's
Okay.
because it's antibiotic resistant bacteria. So it's not a new thing. A lot of things are carried in the wind. But so anyway, the samples were
It's
taken
the
from an
bacteria
atmospheric
itself. Okay.
research station, 4,800 feet above sea level, and above a dormant volcano in central France. Okay, so the analysis of the retrieved mist revealed that they contain between 330 to more than 30,000 bacteria per millimeter of cloud water, or an average of around 8,000 bacteria per millimeter. They also identified 29 subtypes of antibiotic resistant genes in the bacteria. Now, this is,
Oh boy.
terrifying, death from above. So, drug resistance, of course, occurs when bacteria are exposed to antibiotics and develop an immunity to them over generations. But these adaptations are becoming what the study described as a major sanitary concern worldwide, making it harder, in some cases impossible, to treat certain bacterial infections. I mean, look, we often know where okay, it's person to person, it's polluted surfaces, it's hospitals, it's causing most deaths. But now the atmosphere is very stressful for bacteria, but however, the bacteria can be very stressful to human
Oh
beings.
yeah. Well, it's mutating quite a bit. A lot of people they think it's one simple thing, like
Right. No, it's not.
over prescription of antibiotics. It's not just that. Well, a lot of this medicine's like made in India and Southeast Asia, which doesn't have hold to the same environmental standards of the industrialized world's standards, but it's not like, oh, they're bad and we're good. We buy those products, and guess what? That's one of the reasons, besides cheap manual labor, why a lot of stuff's produced there is you can just dump all this byproduct crap, and so a lot of the resistance or just bacteria being antibiotic resistant is just the waste that we dump in, so they can just evolve to kind of get stronger. It's sort of like, okay, the rules about pissing in the pool is you can do it over in this corner.
Right.
Well, that's not really going to work, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I remember, I mean, we were talking about Dark Waters, that film about the DuPont, dump. I just saw an article today about how in Unity, Maine, which should be one of the more pristine states, that the sludge is polluting a lot of the farmland there and causing just, again, untold numbers of cancer in Unity, Maine. I mean, it's just, because of runoff. I mean, and now that we have the flooding all along the Mississippi, which is basically, the toilet of America, one of them.
Right. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big problem. I mean, I guess Unity, Maine, everyone's unified because everyone has cancer. I guess
Yeah,
that,
there you
I
go.
guess that's
Yeah,
the thread, right? Um,
pretty much so.
so a mother and her daughters, as we know, the West had a lot more rain than it usually
Oh, yeah.
has. and they, and,
230% more snow in some of the mountains.
so the spring is they have the super bloom that's going, these desert flowers that are just really extraordinary. So all these people are going out for these long hikes, and a mother and her daughters went out for a nice long hike to get some pick some flowers, and they were pretty far from their car when a swarm of bees just started attacking them, and they couldn't just make it to their car, and they just had to. She called, got on her phone, she's like, called her sister, help, and fire department came, and I mean they were stung. I mean, she was stung almost 80 times, and I mean, it can almost kill you. But they had all these techniques. I don't know, these kind of hose things.
And they hosed him down.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like that sucks.
Definitely. No beards of bees for me, thank you.
No. We were talking about bees last week. Well, maybe you would need a beard of bees to get around the new Utah law of facial recognition if you want to look at porn on the internet. And of course, there's a lot of civil liberties. People are going nuts saying, well, I mean, Utah, which is hidden all types of Mormon molestation shit and all this.
Look at me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're saying, well, this just to enforce the age limit to watch it. And
well, you know what Pornhub did?
I did not know.
Pornhub blocked access in Utah. You can't look at Pornhub anymore. They're pissed. They're like, fine, no porn for Utah.
Yeah. Well, you know what? There's enough porn going on there anyway, just in everyday life as far as religious perversion.
Sure.
It's so stupid. It's a real bully move.
It's so dumb. Anyway, and of course, who's one of the big promoters of this is the Fruit Loop that ran off from her husband to marry to hang out with a sex guru, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Hello.
I didn't know she was from Utah. Actually, I should.
No, she's not. But but she's the one complaining about Pornhub and Hunter Biden and all this other crap.
Okay.
Anyway, no, Tim. That music can stimulate different reactions in different people depending on where they're hearing it, what kind of music it is. That's why we do it. But a musical climax, it screams the headline. Mystery scream during Tchaikovsky's concert in L.A. was a female audience member experiencing a quote-unquote full-body orgasm. Yes. So all eyes were transfixed on the orchestra performing the Fifth Symphony in Los Angeles when a concertgoer suddenly let out a full-body orgasm. The loud scream is said to have suddenly erupted from the balcony at the Walt Disney Concert Hall where there was a packed crowd. And of course, everybody's turning around to see, what the hell? Who did that? And so that and there's even an audio clip of the moment when someone is heard screaming during a quiet period in the performance, which of course has gone viral. Now the orchestra carries on as normal without missing a single beat. Of course, I mean, they just had to carry on.
They didn't get a beat off.
They did.
Terrible.
Okay, so anyway, they're assuming, they're assuming that this woman had a screaming orgasm to the point where the whole orchestra just at one point actually did stop playing, and the quote was, "Well, some people really know how to live."
If she did in fact have an orgasm, I think her
she might
partner to her side. I think she had some other stimulation going on because Tchaikovsky's Fifth is just not orgasmic enough. I really don't buy that.
I must say, I don't play classical music when I want to, get it on. But then again,
I mean, late romanticism, though, that she's a boring date. And if she got off on that fucking piece, she's talk about a snoozer.
The audience member said that her outburst was rather wonderful and refreshing. Their entire audience gasped. Because you know how quiet these guys. I mean, everybody is so well behaved.
Well, yeah, and
$120.
Let's talk about that too. And because I always find, yes, you should respect the performers. At the same time, this whole thing about everyone just whispering and wearing these outfits. That's all. That's all bullshit. That's new. That's some social register shit that came, by the Carnegies. The industrialists that basically felt inferior culturally to the Europeans, and they thought we need to have these orchestras, the Carnegie Hall, and so then they turn them basically into these social register gatherings, and everyone whispers because you fucking go 50 years prior in Europe, like people were throwing, hogging down food, throwing shit, like getting ways, like, fuck this, yeah. I mean, that's how that shit was. And it's not traditional to behave all uptight and then play crappy late romantic bullshit like Tchaikovsky's Fifth. Sorry, that her orgasm got me mad. She fucking came to that piece. Come on.
I guess it wouldn't be the first time somebody's orgasm got you. Well, maybe. No, actually, I'll take that. I usually get mad if I don't have one, not when somebody else has one, but that's just me. I don't know. What else, Tim? We're gearing up for some shows. That's all I know.
Well, we have, I got some, things were a little quiet for a second. Got some show. Yeah, well, basically starting next week until the end of July. I'm pretty busy, which I'm psyched about. One thing is, so, all these vigilante shootings have been happening. Someone's like, oh, someone's at my door, or who knows what. But they've really increased.
My driveway, gotta shoot him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they've really increased with the leaf blowers. The leaf blowers. I can kind of relate. Those are pretty annoying, and I can handle a lot of sounds and noise. But I think just the concept. It's like car alarms. It's like, I think these are for dumb people. I don't know what that's about. I mean, a car alarm, I've never once seen people running out of their apartment or houses like, hey, there must be someone breaking into this car, let's do something. Just everyone's pissed by the sound. And then, of course, leaf blowers. I mean, it stinks. And I remember it again, for dumb people, Simon and I were in a car once, and it was just hours before Hurricane Sandy was about to hit, and there's always people with leaf blowers. I'm like, wait a second, you're about to have the granddaddy or grandmama of all leaf blowers arriving in about 3 hours. I don't know what you're fucking doing.
Well, look, I mean, let's go back to the point of this kind of vigilantism. I mean, and all of the mass shootings and all of this, when people feel that their life has no meaning, they don't think anybody else's does either. And therefore they can just go on a killing spree of rando strangers knocking at their door, pulling into their driveway, walking down the street, riding a bike, et cetera, et cetera. It's just because the quality of life in this country on levels we rarely speak about has been reduced to just a ridiculous form of day-to-day existence. And
well, the people are under extreme financial stress. People are, the addiction went through the roof, and alcoholism went through the roof during the pandemic. So people are doing their best to try to rope it in, and they're really on fucking edge. And then you have some buck-toothed dork out there with a leaf blower, and you have some maniac with a gun, and I don't know, it sounds pretty wild.
Anyway, our guest today is Cathi Unsworth, speaking about musical crimes, or the crimes that inspired the music of a certain era, and Season of the Witch, the book of Goth, which details, a broad range of people, goth, semi-goth inspired, those who were inspired by things from Robert Johnson forward. And she's going to do a little reading for us right now on the Lydian Spin, episode number 199 with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dillon, and Cathi Unsworth. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and my dear friend, novelist, editor, teacher, crime noir specialist, who has a new book out now called Season of the Witch, the Book of Goth, Cathi Unsworth. Please give us a little reading.
Okay, well, let's start at the very beginning of the Season of the Witch. Where there is despair, Margaret Thatcher entered 10 Downing Street on the 4th of May 1979 with the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi on her lips. One of those voters who believed she had come to deliver the spring was Ian Curtis, the then 22-year-old singer of Joy Division, new father to Natalie, and charismatic focus of the cult with no name, as the seers on the weekly music press had dubbed his band's intense following. More than anyone else, the music Joy Division made in their brief existence encapsulates the despair that Thatcher spoke of, as disillusioned survivors of the worn-out, bashed-up, dirty old 70s ditched the last tattered vestiges of the post-war consensus and put their faith in her and a gleaming new 80s to come. Curtis might well be the only person in this book who voted for Thatcher, and he didn't just give her his ballot, he insisted his wife Deborah did the same in order not to cancel his vote. He's certainly the only person still revered as an icon by everyone who didn't, which testifies to the contradiction at the core of this most charismatic and troubled young man. Ian Curtis struggled to contain so many conflicting identities in him that he would end up bringing his own life to a brutal conclusion in just over a year's time. How is that?
I enjoy that, and that's some info I didn't know. I didn't know Ian Curtis was a Margaret Thatcher supporter. Not that I even care. I mean, so the same thing. It's like James Brown endorsing Nixon.
Yeah.
And these characters are more complicated, and people want to dominate the narrative of what they think these people are.
Let's bring it to the very frickin' present. Excuse me, Tim. Nick Cave going to the coronation. I mean, if he hasn't already cast doubts in my mind of where his true genius once lay.
Wow.
He's going to the frickin' coronation. Now, here again, I mean, this is like full circle. And by the way, Season of the Witch, the Book of Goth, is kind of full circle for you in a sense that you began as a music journalist. And what I find really fascinating about this book is, for instance, not only is it about all the bands that defied the times and defined goth, but in connection to the political times, but also that you go back to what really inspired goth, and all the way back from Robert Johnson to the Doors to Aleister Crowley, and you make this connective tissue once again, and it really makes so much sense. And even just the short passage you just read about not only the contradiction of the times and what caused things to be the way they were.
Yeah, it's in a way it's sort of follow on from doing Jordan's book, when I got to know a whole lot more about Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood. And
let's talk about that for a minute. And that was your last book, I mean, of the 8 or 9 in your repertoire. And that was a book on Jordan, who's people really don't know very much about her. Tell us who she was. She was very important in the punk scene in the UK.
In England, yeah, she was a very, very much of an extraordinary character. She worked for Malcolm and Vivienne in their shop on 430 Kings Road, which is where this is where the virus emanates from, basically. And she came to them. She lived near Brighton in this little seaside town called Seaford, and she actually grew up obsessed with the ballet. And I think that took her into that was her first fantasy world of. She had a really terrible, she was good at ballet, she was really good at it, but she had a terrible car accident when she was 15 and could have died. And the doctor said, "You'll never walk again." But such was her strength of will, not only did she walk again, she also went on to carry on winning prizes for her ballet. But
wow.
She also did become a bit of a rebel after that. And she was dressing in a very similar way to what Malcolm and Vivienne were putting in their shops. It was almost like by osmosis. When they first saw her, she came fully formed. They didn't really dress her into their style, but she was very good at being the front person for their shop, so much so that Andy Warhol thought she was Vivienne Westwood. And when we did an interview with Vivienne, she said to us, "Well, Jordan, he was very disappointed when he met me because all along he thought I was you." So yeah, she was so we did her life story, and Jordan didn't really want it to just be about her. She was a bit embarrassed about being the focal point. She really wanted it to be the life and times that she'd lived through. And so we did it sort of as a cultural history and a pop culture handbook, as well as what went on.
And so how did you do the book with Jordan? I mean, did you ghostwrite it, or were you just like, was it like because you are an investigative journalist. I mean, whether you're dealing with the ghost of murdered prostitutes, crimes of the past, World War II, Thatcher, I mean, I view you first and foremost as really an investigative journalist. So, in working on the Jordan book, was it more like interview and ghostwriting, or how did you get the stuff out of her?
It was interviews, and it was extraordinary, like a sort of séance with the living. I felt that way because Jordan couldn't seem to remember very much on her own, and she would get very frustrated. But once we started doing interviews with the people she'd been there at the time, it all came back as one would remember something. Then that would open the memory hole, so to speak, and then all this good stuff would come out. And because it all happened in, in such a interesting, amazing period of time, and this is what relates to the goth book, it really, Malcolm McLaren really was a flipping disruptor, and he was so full of ideas and
And bullshit.
and yeah, he was so charismatic, and he was like, that shop became this intense focal point for this youth movement, and lots of people came out of that shop. He became massive stars, and
I mean, from punk to goth.
yeah, and they went away, like Howard Devoto went away and took the Pistols to the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester, and there they were seen by Joy Division, John Cooper Clarke, everyone else in Manchester, who formed a significant punk band, and then that spread, from there around the country with the help of the unseen network of Peel Towers, the John Peel show late at night, which everyone tuned
So
in.
important.
Yeah.
I don't think since Wolfman Jack maybe, or very local college DJs, that there was anybody as influential in radio as John Peel was to music in England. Now, I mean, in the late 70s, in the early 70s, we did have like Don Kirshner's rock concert on TV. We had the midnight special, but I don't think there was ever a radio, like LA would have a very influential radio program.
But not the range that John Peel
not the
had.
range.
I mean, the range was just, yeah.
Exactly, not the range. Now, Cathi, you are like an encyclopedia of not only crime and music and spirit and the spirit world as well, but because you're such a, I'm going to say it, OCD fetishist for details. How do you maintain, or is it just, are you constantly taking notes? How do you remember all this shit? And I understand why Jordan might not remember a lot of stuff because hello, brain hurt like a warehouse. There was no room left to spare, to quote David Bowie.
No, it's so true. No, I'm quite disciplined with what I do, I suppose. Before I started writing the goth book, I wrote a huge timeline of everything that happened in the 80s, so that I could remember all the significant events, where they fell, then plotted onto that where all the significant albums came out and who was meeting who, and so therefore I had the spine of the book, if you like, and then it was a matter of, it was a book of concentric circles because I had to keep rewinding in order to do everybody who's in the book justice. You sort of had to rewind, say, from the initial bands in that chapter I just read, where Joy Division magazine, Susie and the Banshees of the Cure, who were the sort of the first ones that I think. But meanwhile, you were doing all that stuff in New York. So when I get to you, I rewind the chapter, which I like
to London. And right, but I mean, this is like concentric circle. It is more like a spider's web. We call it the connective tissue when we talk about how we relate on the podcast to people and the connection between them. But Season of the Witch, Book of Goth is more like a kaleidoscope of concentric circles or a spider web. And it would be interesting to have, as they do on some websites, when they have like the graph. But I mean, that would be a puzzle unto itself.
But I'd like to think it would be one of the quotes. I use a little quote at the beginning of each chapter from a sort of popular TV or radio show, or something that just sort of is a bit of an ironic commentary on the chapter. And the one I used in the chapter where the IRA try and blow up Brighton Grand, well, they do blow it up, but they try and blow up Margaret Thatcher, was this line from this amazing program called Edge of Darkness. That was one of my 70s favorite thrillers, and it was written by Troy Kennedy Martin. He was the brother of the guy who did the Sweeney, and he did work in secret services, so he kind of knew what he was talking about, but it had this really strange outre supernatural side to it. And there's these two guys who are like the two grand wizards, sort of just, they send this policeman on a quest, and they know he can't possibly come back from it alive, but they need to put him And because his daughter has died as part of this protest group, they know he can't refuse. So one of them is talking about the Irish, and he says, I put a lot of store in the Irish education. You only have to look at the Book of Kells to see the intricate way in which their minds work. And I kind of think that the Book of Goth is like that, intricate interlace in the way that those Celtic interlaces were. I'd like to think it would look as pretty as that.
Okay.
And
I
be
mean,
as
Goth-
solid as that as well.
I mean, did Goth ever go away? We know it's making a big comeback just on with things like Wednesday and whatever else. But I mean, you know, there is some say there's a Saturn return. There's also a 40-year return on things. Sometimes a 400-year return.
But it's way more
Sometimes a
mainstream than ever.
100-year
It's very
return.
mainstream now, right? I mean, the goth fashion, for instance, presented today, it seems accepted. No one's challenged by it anymore. And then of course it's mass produced more than it ever was. You don't see as much homemade stuff as kids just go out.
All right. So Tim, so coming back one day from the Mexican restaurant up the street,
yeah,
and some young teenage boy said to me, "You look like the Addams Family. I bet you don't know the theme song." And I'm like, da 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 da. Don't tell me I don't know. Like, which one? Morticia or Wednesday? Or It or Thing? I was in a band with Lurch.
What was their reaction? Do they enjoy it? You're
shocked. They were
shocked.
shocked.
Okay, all right.
I said, as long as you didn't say Elvira, I didn't have my push-up bra on that day.
That's hilarious. I think
this is going to be your biggest book, Cathi, and you've been doing some events for it. Obviously, fantastic. Are you with a new publisher now?
Yeah, this new imprint called 9/8 Books. They are an imprint of a Danish company called Bonnier, and my publisher is a guy called Pete Selby, and he doesn't come from a publishing background. He comes from our price. He started working there and worked his way up. So I think he kind of knows it was. He immediately got the synopsis and wanted to publish it, whereas, dare I say, younger people and less people whose whole lives weren't music basically didn't quite get. And the other thing I'm really grateful to him for is that he didn't take any of the politics out of this book. Because
that's such an important part of what you're detailing is the the correspondence between something that looks dark and weird and gloomy and miserable and something that really is fucking dark, gloomy, and miserable, which is the politics. I mean, really, God, the visuals of God really reflected the darkness of what the politics were at the time.
Yeah.
But also, Cathi, I appreciate just with the passage you started with, there seems to be a trend where people want to own the narrative and take away truth, and for whatever reason, but people want everything to be so convenient and tidy and just consistent with what their beliefs are, and the world is not like that. There's a lot of dissonance, there's a lot of collision, and I appreciate when people just let things be what they are, and it seems.
Because I think, don't you think it does people a disservice if you don't tell it how it actually was and idealize it to how you wish it was, but it never was. It was
right.
People had to have something to fight against, Lydia, what was New York like when you first went there? How much did you have? What was New York like when you first lived there compared to what it's like now?
Well, it was glorious. I did prefer the decay as an apocalyptician. Crime to me is just a way of life for some of us. I felt right at home. You know me. I'm a nomad.
It's amazing that people, one of my favorite things, like to put the psycho into psychogeography, as we always like to do. One of my favorite ley lines of this book is that Killing Joke had their first squat on this road called Portland Road, which is down in Holland Park. And there was actually a programme a few years back about the roads of London and their fortunes, focusing on what roads were like when they were on Booth's poverty map in Victorian times, when he charted the maps of poverty of London, and what they are now. And Portland Road was one of the scummiest bits of Notting Dale, as it was then known, full of shiv wielding teddy boys and very, now it's full of, it's the most expensive road in London, full of bankers and yeah. And Killing Joke's first squat was on this road, and they shared it with a guy they called Dave the Wizard, who had a heptagram tattooed on his face. And that, I like that. That's that road now and that road then, and it would probably shock people as much to see where you were living, Lydia, then as
well. I mean, of course, and I mean, I was in London as well in the very early '80s. I'm Brixton, Hackney. I mean, and not to mention, of course, gentrification at this point here and now. I just had a thought about what was interesting is there was so much, and not as if there isn't now, but because we didn't have the internet, we had newspapers, whether they were music newspapers, nightly news, daily newspapers. It seemed that there was, at that point in the late 70s, 80s, just a lot more musical political rebellion against the times. But I'm wondering if there's so much less of it now because people are just swiping and, you know, the young people are not as involved, or they don't care as much because it's not in their face as much. And also they're living with their parents until they're fucking 30, which was not what our scene was.
No, but it's interesting. Last night I did have an event and people were talking about how so many different types of music would be played at their local goth nights up and down the country. But there'd always be a few staples, and some of, you know, it would be a bit of David Bowie, a bit of T-Rex, but also things like Golden Earring would often be in there. And I was thinking on about this today, I was thinking, well, in them days, everything was a quest because you couldn't just instantly get access to all this music. And I was thinking about all the hours I spent rifling through secondhand records in, you know, when I was a kid, every lunchtime going to these stores over and over again to try. And, you know, when you'd find a Doors record, it's like, oh my God, it's gold. But all that excitement, and I guess, and learning stuff from the music press and buying fanzines and you know, making your own fanzines. That was all.
But there were also journalists before you were a journalist, there were journalists we could kind of trust to lead us into a musical direction that somehow meant something to us.
Yeah, I hope that I've put all the best of them in my book. Because, you know, people like Chris Bond, aka Bieber Kopf, he
The
wrote,
Wire,
yeah, he wrote so brilliantly about you and John Savage and Mary Harron, and, you know, there were some really fantastic journalists about at the time, and I certainly got more of an education from reading them than I did at school. So.
What was the first? So you're 19. You decide, okay, I have to do some rock journalism. What was the first article or interview you did, and how did you bang your foot into the door?
Well, I was on this course at London College of Fashion where you had to do a placement in industry. And in my first year there was like a woman who was an old girl she'd been on the course and now she had her own PR company called Lynn Parker. God bless her. Goth bless her. She was the stepping stone. She was doing the press for Reading Festival and she said, if anyone wants to come and do their summer job, me please.
For the Reading Festival, yeah.
Yeah, and it was quite a good year. Alice Cooper was headlining, and
when it was still good, you mean?
Yeah, and it was when Alice with this pet boa constrictor, which was brilliant, and the Stranglers, who I loved, and there was, I know, but anyway, it was just Reading Festival, and so while I was there, I got talking to a few. My next placement was coming up at 2 weeks after term started, and I spoke to lots of different people from different music papers, but the one who was, I guess, the friendliest to me was this photographer called Steve Double from Sounds, and he went, oh yeah, Tony Stewart loves students, they virtually run the place, give him a ring. And so I did, and yes, it's good as his word.
Sounds, was that Sounds magazine?
This was Sounds, and Tony had recently taken...
Sure, love students because they do all the work, yeah.
Yeah, no, but he really wanted, it was quite, do you know what, my interview with Tony was more rigorous than the one I had to get into the London College of Fashion, actually. He was really like, what music do you like? How much time do you spend going to gigs? How many records have you got? What, you know, it was that sort of thing to make sure.
And so what was the first article or interview you did? Was it a review of the Reading Festival?
No, it was the first interview I did, weirdly enough, was with this guy called Nosha Powell, who was in a comic strip presents film pretending, called Eat the Rich, with starring Motorhead as well as having their
Starring
song.
Motorhead.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah. And he was an interesting, because I started off doing features for the sort of news pages. That's where I started off.
For the what?
And the news pages. So I sort of had to prove that I could do these little articles. So he was this guy that had worked for the Cray twins, and he had an all very checkered.
Oh, wait. Okay, hold on. Had worked for the Cray twins. To those who don't know, can you please explain? They might have seen the Crays on Netflix. I'm not sure. The Cray twins. Can we just, because this is how intimately, though, especially in the UK, crime does relate to music, does relate to politics.
Yeah, yes, they were the sort of leading
handsome and dapper
of the swinging 60s, I guess you would call them. They were photographed by David Bailey. They were like celebrities and
celebrity criminals.
Yeah, celebrity criminals, and they're still a massive industry. And yeah, Nosh Chappelle was a pallbearer at their funerals as well. That's how close he was to them. And he was, I guess, in this comic strip film as a sort of, he was playing the Prime Minister, and he was hilarious. He was saying these speeches very close to what Margaret Thatcher was saying. Basically, my agenda is close down more hospitals, build more rockets, and yeah. So he was the first. So this, politics, music, pop culture, crime. Lies, basically. But the first actual band interview I did was the Band of Susans. So that was good. Well, I think they had their first record out at the time, and yeah.
And then you were hooked.
And then and because Tony was approved of how well I did my work. So.
Well, because again, you're a fetishistic, detail-oriented investigative journalist.
But I think I had to do a lot of practice, writing all them novels and everything before I could do a book like this. It's been a work a long time in the research, shall we say.
Let's talk about the season of the Witch Book of Goth for a minute. And because it's so detailed, it's really such an immense overview of the music and the times, and also the influences that caused it to happen at that point. I mean, I do love not only the past historical references, like when you bring up the godfather of this kind of period might have been Aleister Crowley, might have been Jim Morrison, etc. It's such a thorough investigation. How many bands did you cover in this? Can you even remember? Because the preview you sent me didn't have a chapter list. I couldn't count them.
I can't actually. I have to go back to.
Couldn't remember. Just tell us some of the people that you're highlighting in this, so people understand. Make their pre-orders, because the book comes out May 11th, I believe.
Yeah, May 11th, and it starts with, like I said, Banshees, Cure, Magazine, Joy Division. Then Bauhaus and Killing Joke, the sort of magical bands who each have their own wizard. Then it's you, Lydia, and the Gun Club and the Cramps and the birthday parties as the sort of the cultural ambassadors. Then I have a chapter on the Batcave Club in London that also.
Batcave, yeah.
Yeah, and Batcave and the Club Foot, which sort of. These two, London After Midnight. So that covers psychobilly, which came from the Cramps and their influence, and the Batcave, where, as you know, Lydia, lots of people mingled and lots of new bands fluttered away, having mingled in the Batcave. And I bring in Mark Almond into that chapter, and Soft Cell and Mark and the Mambas and that. And then we go on from there to as Echo and the Bunnymen in Liverpool, and the stuff going on there. Goth's own county, Yorkshire, the Sisters of Mercy, Southern Death Cult, New Model Army. The interesting difference between Leeds and Bradford, the psychogeography again, that they were always on opposing sides in the previous civil wars of the Wars of the Roses and the English Civil War. Leeds were always versus Bradford, until the next civil war, the miners' strike, when all the bands were on the same side, all against Thatcher. Quite interesting, the darkness of Yorkshire in those years, because the Yorkshire Ripper obviously operated in that time.
Let's stop on the Yorkshire Ripper for 1 minute. We're not just going to throw that name out, First of all, David Peace, who you turned me on to, who is just an amazing crime writer, basically focusing on the Yorkshire Ripper. I believe he was in grade school or junior high when he left school to go to the steps of the trial when they caught the Yorkshire Ripper. And by the way, there is a very good documentary on the Yorkshire Ripper on Netflix now, because he should have been busted 13 times before all the murders he was committing. So, and the Yorkshire Ripper was kind of like us, the way Son of Sam impacted New York. I think the Yorkshire Ripper impacted the UK.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
you?
They were both operating at the same time, those spooky mirror images of each other, weren't they?
But Yorkshire Ripper, and educate me, were all of the murders in Yorkshire?
Yeah, I think pretty much there might have been one over the border in Lancashire. And they
Okay.
weren't all his work either. There's DNA evidence to suggest.
Oh, interesting. So copycats,
But also the Yorkshire Ripper, that caused a lot of, because they were saying, oh, the women should be locked up at night. It caused a huge feminist uprising of women in the streets of the UK going, why should we be banned from the streets? Catch this motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly. So, and in the end, it was two beat bobbies who caught him doing their job, noticing suspicious
right. And
behavior.
one who knew quite all along. He was
Yeah.
even nicknamed the Ripper at his where he worked as a trucker.
No, it's so bizarre. My
were they all in the towns, or were they up in the moors as well, like in weird countryside?
No, they were not, more or less within the city centres and more or less within the red light districts. But then his frenzy increased. He started going into student areas and getting young students, and that's when suddenly it became like, oh my God, he's taking the lives of innocent women now, and it was very
not only prostitutes. Well, this is the problem, right? This is the problem: is when it's women that have no choice but to be on the streets trying to survive, who then get taken out. It's discounted.
Yeah, not mention that most of them at the time were mothers themselves struggling to bring up children.
Exactly.
But anyway, so, and little David Peace running his investigation from his dad's shed, trying to catch the Ripper himself. And
it was the Red Riding trilogy, his books, correct?
Yeah.
They were fantastic. But anyway, we jumped from the Yorkshire Ripper to David Peace.
But he was part of my Goth Guide to Yorkshire, so he told me a lot about the clubs that he used to go to, and he was a massive Sisters of Mercy fan. And so obviously, when I first started reading his books, it reminded me of all that music. I just thought, this is like discovering a great new band. And unsurprisingly, he was into all the same music as me. And, there had been chicken dancing at the Hellfire Club in Wakefield.
Terrifying, thrilling books from different perspectives on the same crime. And I think that True Detective season 1 was very influenced by David Peace. Somebody can research that for me and tell me if I'm right or wrong. But season 1 of True Detective being like my Bible of should be true crime, just amazing.
I love that as well. I think this might be a bit of Harry Crews in there as well, Lydia.
Could be a bit of the old Harry Crews snuffled inside.
Yeah.
The Lydian spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dolan, Cathi Unsworth is going to bless us with another reading from her incredibly well-researched, beautifully poetic investigation into not only the bands that made up a wide variety of the goth culture, but the politics, which also inspired, because they tried to kill us. Please, Cathi, carry on.
I heard the news as I arrived back in London from Leicester, having spent the day there interviewing Crazyhead for Sounds, outriders of the Grebo phenomena instigated by Zodiac Mindwarp. They'd been signed to Feud Records by Dave Balfe's henchman and my fellow sound scribe, Andy Ross, aka Hurt. As I descended an escalator in Euston Station to catch a tube to the office in Blackfriars, I saw ashen-faced city traders crying into their evening standards. In wonder, I read the headlines that announced Thatcher was stepping down. Could it be true? It seemed almost surreal that the nightmare could finally be over. Sounds was incongruously housed in Ludgate House, beneath the offices of the Daily Express, whose proprietor, Lord Stephens of Ludgate, we refer to as Shaky. Along with Kerrang, Record Mirror, Music Week and Select, We belonged to Punch Publications, inky offspring of the now defunct satirical Victorian Journal, whose figurehead remained in a rather malign bronze statue form, guarding our reception. As I stepped out of the lift and past Mr. Punch, I could hear the sounds of a party. On the other side of the office doors, tabletop dancing to Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, Bad Miss M, Stand Down Margaret, and Tramp the Dirt Down, with attendant cheering and clanking of bottles of ice-cold Sol reassured me. Thatcher was gone. Things, it seemed, could really only get better. 2 days later, I got to see my favourite band for the first time since the Albert Hall Festival of Remembrance in 1985, when the Sisters of Mercy played a sold-out Wembley Arena. "We'd like to thank everybody," said Andrew Eldritch from the stage, knowing his audience contained former members of his band and many other cowboy hat-wearing imitators who've been keeping my seat warm. It seemed to me then that the sole remaining original sister, whose visions of 1983 had so unnervingly foretold the coming civil wars, must have planned this outcome all along. But of course, things didn't stay this cheerful for long. John Major won his party's vote to succeed Margaret Thatcher, and the day after brought back Michael Heseltine as the Environment Secretary. His first job was to scrap the poll tax. Neil Kinnock did not win the 1992 general election that was supposedly his to take, thanks in no small measure to the ceaseless mockery and derision aimed at him by the Sun. With a picture of the Labour leader's head inside a light bulb, their 9th of April 1992 headline ran, "If Kinnock wins today, will the last person to leave Britain please turn out the lights?" Followed 2 days after John Major's 21-seat majority with the crowingly illiterate, "It was the Sun what won it." Before she left office, Thatcher just had time to pass the Broadcasting Act of 1990, which relaxed the regulations on TV and radio stations sufficiently for Murdoch to merge his new Sky Satellite TV company with his only rival, the British Satellite Broadcasting Company, to form B-Sky B on the 2nd of November. All subsequent British Prime Ministers, including the successively more repellent Thatcherite homunculi Tony Blair, David Cameron and Boris Johnson, would show the same fealty to Murdoch, and not even the 2011 Leveson inquiry into phone hacking and police bribery at News International did anything to dent his dark power. The Thelemic teachings of Aleister Crowley may have served Jas Coleman and Jimmy Page well enough, but if anyone in the story has truly lived up to Iwas's commandment as delivered through Crowley, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," then it has to be Rupert Murdoch.
And by the way, two things, and thank you. I remember the phone hacking scandal. Well, this was quite controversial at the time because he was hacking into a lot of celebrities' phones.
Yes.
And getting dirt on them for the Daily Mail or whatever other atrocious. By the way, I still have to read the Daily Mail every day because hate and beseech Murdoch as I do, they have some very good photographic essays on nature, I must say, and science. Forget the gossip. But yeah, the phone hacking scandal, which was really, I mean, one of the first like cyber insecurity things that went down. I think Hugh Grant was one of the first to be hacked.
Yeah, and what was interesting about that was it was entirely funded. There was this great journalist on The Guardian called Nick, oh God, and of course now I come to say his name, the great journalist, I can't remember his flipping name. Nick Davis on The Guardian was the one that kind of kept this story going. But Murdoch had the money to close everybody down, but the News of the Screws had set up Oswald Mosley's son Max, who had loads and loads and loads of money, and sort of entrapped him and put this cover story of him being into Nazi bondage parties, which he was so upset. I think his son took his own life after this headline, and Mosley was so angry with Murdoch that he basically bankrolled all these people to be able to give evidence to, I think Nick Davis did it in conjunction with some other broadcasters in America, and so that there was a pool of them. And they eventually bankrolled it to the inquiry to take place and to people to be able to stand up to him. But the fact was that even then, and he did this whole, a bit like, you see at the end of a Scorsese movie when the gangsters get together and they bring in their like oxygen machines and they pretend that they're dying and they're really old. And then as soon as they're in the room on their own little camps, now how are we going to divvy up this room like this? But Murdoch did one of those kind of, oh, I'm so feeble, I can't remember anything action. And anyway, got whatever chastised he was. But as Nick Davis writes in the end of his book, Hack Attack, the waves just have wiped the beach clean again, and he's still, nothing really lasting.
Well, now in America, and it how's it going to even bother to affect him and his bloody billions? Was with his Fox News, which is just the most outlandish and ridiculous, full of absolute conspiratorial crap.
Well, not just that. It's phone tapping again. He got in trouble with the Royals are suing him. It doesn't stop.
Racist, misogynist. He should die already, you old motherfucker. But again, in his place will come someone else, because as you just stated in your original reading in the second half of the show, the wheel keeps turning, greased by the same dirty money. And on we go. And on we go.
No, it's true. That was the sad conclusion I came to. But although we become totally and utterly disillusioned with any kind of thinking any kind of politics can ever be anything other than bent, at least all the music from this time period remains as much of a powerful, inspiring force.
And which is to not say that there isn't music from this period that might be rebellious, avant-garde, dangerous, but it's harder to even know who they are, even with the onslaught of the availability of the internet, because the only thing that's focused on, because we don't have a sounds magazine, we don't have a melody maker, we don't have John Peel, we don't have, Cream has reformed, but we don't have Rock Scene magazine or Circus. And it's weird because with the gluttony of that which exists on the internet, you have to, in a different way, dig through the bins of history. And that's why it's not a bad idea to go back. When people in their 20s complain to me, like, there's no visionaries in my generation, or only one is likes, and it's all about fashion and how you blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, I'm reading again, as I will continue to, fucking Henry Miller, who was writing Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn in 1926 to 41. Sometimes you have to go backward, hello, Book of Goth, to realize the importance of what means something to you.
No, and it was good having 40 years perspective on all of that, to be able to look at that now, as opposed, and also obviously being a lot older and slightly less naive than I was at the time when this was happening. But it was an incredible period of history. But also I loved, you mentioned this earlier, doing the Goth Fathers and Goth Mothers and seeing the people, because a lot of them don't ever properly get credit unless, you have led many people to many brilliant artists and writers, and, Lydia.
Well, I was glad to see Lee Hazelwood mentioned in there because, for instance, I had been doing a Lee Hazelwood cover with Eight-Eyed Spy in 1979 or 80. But it was what Roland and I came together on the first time we met, was that we were going to cover Some Velvet Morning, a Lee Hazelwood song. And I couldn't believe that somebody from Australia recently now in London even knew who Lee Hazelwood was. And not many people did at that time.
No, it's amazing. And I'm pretty sure, I've been saying this to people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the reason that Steve Shelley from Sonic Youth re-released Lee's albums would be because he heard of them through you.
Well, whatever. And I'll blame Kate Moss for giving me no royalties for the atrocious version she did with Bobby Gillespie of that very same Some Velvet Morning.
But also, and Bobby Gentry, how many times have we had nights talking about the wonders of Bobby?
To having to finally, record with Cypress Grove with Bobby Gentry. Well, she still remains a woman of great mystery. You can hardly find anything out about her online. She just did a disappearing act.
I think she might have been the smartest woman ever, eh?
She took her bouffant and went the hell south of the Mississippi, the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah. She sailed away with her beautiful swamp witch voice and her beautiful bouffant.
Exactly. It would be great if you had, maybe you do. So you speak about all these bands. It would be great if you made a playlist for people and put it on your website of whatever you think or whatever song specifically of the bands you talk about, particularly, infused you with that, blood tickle that we all seek out.
Yes, it would be a nice thing to do. I'm not sure how it can be achieved without the royalty police coming after me.
No, I mean, just even a list of it. People can go research it on YouTube, or nobody gets paid anyway.
Make your own goth disco. Yeah, that would be really good, actually. Yeah. And
all right.
should put
Sure, why you need more work, don't you, Cathi? Don't you need more work? One of the hardest working women writers today. Now, you're also teaching people. First of all, how did you get this? How did you get invited to do this class?
Well, I've done a few bits and pieces of teaching, starting with Arvon Foundation, which is the Ted Hughes, the poet laureate. The lovely, the lovely windswept Heathcliff of the Moors, Ted Hughes, left his beautiful
maybe the husband of a very good poet.
Yes, the husband, and she, well, is fantastic. He left his farmhouse to this foundation where writers can go and have a bit of peace and quiet in the most Wuthering Heights scenario you can ever imagine, between Hepton Bridge and Heptonstall. And so his farmhouse is on this ridge, and above is Heptonstall, where Sylvia lies in her grave.
That's Sylvia Plath, by the way.
Yeah, Sylvia Plath is there above you, and opposite you is this sort of ridge of moorland where you can just imagine Heathcliff shaking his fist at the moon, and you get to stay in this amazing little cottage down there. And
so how did you get invited to that, first off?
That was I think, I'm not quite sure how I got invited to.
So you got invited to do like a residency there? It's
and I did the best. I did one. The one I enjoyed the most. The first one I really enjoyed was with our mutual friend Jake Arnott, and he kind of really showed me the ropes around teaching. He's really brilliant at it, and so he brings quite a lot of actors practice into it, which is really quite useful for. He's got some great exercises for getting into characters and things like that. That it's almost spooky when you start doing them. And anyway, and then after that, I did a bit for Writers' Centre Norwich, because Weirdo, my book, was set in Norfolk, and I'm from Norfolk. And
tell us just the theme of Weirdo for a minute, because that was another beautiful, based on true or semi-true mythology or crime, because most of your books, other than the Jordan book and the Book of Goth, I mean, they are investigative journalistic approaches to crimes that did exist, that you slightly fictionalize, and then pound the hammer to get the real details into.
Yeah, Weirdo is kind of the fiction version of the Book of Goth, Season of the Witch, because it's set in 1984, the year of the Civil War with the miners, but it's set far away from that action on the Norfolk coast. But although the coppers down there were being paid shed loads of money to go up and have fights with the miners, because that was part of the whole evil of it. They had nothing to do with. They didn't know them. It wasn't part of the community, and they couldn't give them. They got enough money for lots of extra new fridge freezers and home appliances. And at the same time, also, the coast was surrounded by these oil rigs, which is another thing that comes into the Book of Goth, how North Sea oil was the black gold. And one of the things that I still can't get over, actually, the oil rig workers, like the people, and as we know, it was also where there's muck, there's also extreme danger, and Piper Alpha was a major disaster of the Thatcher years. But the guys working on the oil rigs were getting paid something like £65,000 a year. The miners were striking for the right to have a bit more than £10,000 a year.
Oh, yeah. And starting maybe at the age of 10, some of them.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was the scenario when I was growing up. All those oil rigs, like Margaret Thatcher's Black Mass in the North Sea, and goth music was the solace to the people in.
Was the real black gold.
Yeah, that was the real Black Devil. So that was my story of teenage transgression and in similar circumstances to my own. So yeah.
And so then let's go back to what you were saying. So you had a residency at the Ted Hughes.
Oh yeah, I did a bit of that.
Plath's grave.
And then my lovely editor on those crime books, John Williams, and also brilliant writer he is. His partner Anna, she works for Curtis Brown Creative, and they started doing these courses, and she got me on. First of all, they're all online courses, and they start off like 6 weeks and then they grow to 6 months. And
oh God.
Yeah, I got
my mentoring writers, in other words.
Yeah, well, you do. It's a structured course with them, and you go through different aspects of writing, and they submit their work, and we workshop their work, and we do tutorials. And
all right, so Cathi, that's kind of quote unquote a day job, but your books are so elaborately researched, so well written, poetic as well. So, for instance, Season of the Witch. I mean, how long did that take to complete, and how many hours a day do you work on this? And no, you said in the beginning, of course, you're very disciplined, because you're not, these are extremely detailed investigations into whatever the theme is at the time, mostly crime, or at this point, crime and music. So what is your process in writing and writing pretty much a megalithic encyclopedia of goth music and the damage that Thatcher and others have done? I mean, what is your discipline?
Well, yeah, it was, first of all, it was to do this timeline of the 80s, like I said. Then it was to really think about what bands I really wanted to cover, and artists. And it was basically, I wanted the people that I think, because there weren't room to fit every single band in, even ones that I quite liked. And although I have put some bands in that people might not think of as goth bands, they're all part of a scene that I think you have to understand to get the context of all. You have to have people like Crass in there, and their, what they did to understand the full picture of all the story of this decade. Anyway, but it was, how
do you
can I
cut out? Excuse me,
together?
let me cut in. Do you cut out a certain, like, I'm going to do this? Okay, I'm going to do this book, so I'm going to do it every day between these hours, whatever.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Basically, I would, while I was doing this book, I'd have to say that writing the synopsis for this book took a year, but when I'd done that, I knew what was going to be, because you have to present these books, what's going to be in every chapter. So once I'd worked all that out, then I just had to fill in from my old interviews plus stuff that was on the wonderful Rock's Back Pages. I have to tip my hat to them, which is Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle. They've got the archive of, which is
called Back Pages.
Yeah, Rock's Back Pages, and it's much easier to access than going into the British Library, rather, with a pencil and taking notes. Were you
listening to the music while you were writing this too? Would you go back and have a jukebox revival? So, I mean, and back to the question, did you have a self-imposed program every day between these hours? I'm going to do. Yeah, you have to if you're going to do something this.
Yeah, basically just sit down and just get on with it. And I could write all day with this subject. I could. Occasionally running out of fuel, running out of mental fuel, just go for a walk. That's what I say.
Yeah, you gotta clear the mind.
Yeah, I just go for a couple of hours walk, and then the hidden files, as Derek Raymond called them, that sort of problems that you may be encountering, they kind of sort themselves out that way. But yeah, right, in this book, I think I did it between 2 teaching courses, so it would be 3 months teaching, 6 months writing. 3 months teaching. Writing, yeah.
That's impressive. But do you find writing to be, some writers find it to be a task, and they actually don't even enjoy it, even though they love the actual what they're doing, and they love the final product, or they try to, at least. And some people just don't even, they kind of disassociate, and then it kind of it pumps out of them. And I mean, is the process annoying and painstaking for you?
When it's good, it just falls out of you like that. But you have to have the structure, and this is what a lot of writers think. Oh no, I can just keep writing, and It's like that when you start writing your first book and you get really enthusiastic about the whole idea, and then you get halfway through that and then you think, shit, what happens next? Don't know. And every single writer starts to go mad about three-quarters of the way through their book. It starts becoming, can't see. And that's why, that's what these courses are aimed at, teaching you a few tricks, and they're hard-earned tricks along the way to get you back on track and to make you think more. I think about it in gardening terms myself. If you're going to grow some tomatoes, you've got to stake them down and you've got to tie them up and you've got to take off the side shoots and you've got to water them and feed them. You can't.
And you got to watch out for the freaking squirrels. My job.
Yes, you have to, especially in my neighborhood, as you know, Lydia. Those squirrels and their little dirty claws are always
Oh boy. I mean, it's kind of like a riddle that you made for yourself that you have to solve for yourself. It's
very good.
It's
very
bizarre.
good
Yeah.
It is like that.
Right. And speaking with Jerry Stahl or Chris Campion, I mean, as writers, I mean, everybody, there are different techniques, of course, and they are very huge on outlines. And I'm like, outlines? But I don't write novels. And a novel is a very different beast. You know, I mean, I'm not a writer of novels, and I don't even comprehend novels for the most part. To me, it's almost like abstract painting. I appreciate them, but I just, first of all, it's not my art form. But so therefore, it's very interesting to me to know also the process. I mean, if I am setting out to write a book, I again go, all right, between these hours and this hour, you have to have that discipline, whether one line or 100 pages come out. And therefore, you will see the end is in sight. You will know that there's a completion. You can't just be flubbing along. Or, I mean, it's the same with, look, musicians rehearse to get the music perfect. They know when they're going to rehearse.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't just,
woohoo. No,
yeah,
right, exactly.
No, it's like, you've got to be able to, if you want to be a visual artist, you've got to be able to draw your perspective properly before you can abstract it out. It's all practice and it's all discipline, isn't it?
And I love what Tim said, that it's like a mystery that you have to solve.
Yeah, the mystery of yourself, it really is, and yeah, I think my best bit of advice that I always pass on to writers, Ken Bruin told me this, because when I first met Ken, he was pumping out about 2 novels a year. Plus, he was working as a teacher in Brixton, trying to keep kids who would rather be gangsters interested in English literature and writing and stuff. And he was, I said, how the fuck do you do this all, Ken? And he's just said 2 pages a day every day. If you stick to that, you'll have your first draft in 6 months. And he's flipping all right. He also said, and do you always say this too, Lydia, you've got to find something that you feel really passionately angry about, or, really passionately about anyway, even if anger isn't, it's something that you feel so strongly about that it keeps the motivation going. So you have to.
Well, and exactly, because all of your books, I mean, they are about crimes committed at certain times in certain areas, which are affecting not only the people that the crimes are perpetrated against, but the community at large. I mean, this is what all of your books deal with, and with the Season of the Witch and the Goth book, it's that, the salve to the nightmare of the politics at that point was again going into a more beautiful form of darkness. Your own creation of darkness, the glory of the black velvet hole of your own existence, to avoid the void that the politicians are trying to create in their truly satanic methods of the slaughter of the individual, of the cancer of not only the mind, the body, and the soul. Hallelujah. Welcome to my church.
Yes. Get down and pray. Yes. You said it.
Well, I mean, Cathi, you might not have been the first. I think you were the first and the last who ever fainted at one of my spoken word shows. And I knew that.
One of your revival tent meetings.
It was a revival.
Screaming. Yeah. And you opened my third eye.
I didn't even have to in the head. No, you just went down. Exactly.
Yeah. I've never been the same since, thank God.
Nice.
That's the only crime I might take responsibility for. Somebody that doesn't even believe in guilt or crime, but still. So we go. Well, I think it's a massive success, and the Season of the Witch, I think it's going to be your bestseller. It's mandatory reading for anybody interested in a very specific, not only the specific period in time that goth music, but again, the forefathers of it, what inspired it, and the political damage that was being done at the time. It's so important, Cathi. Congratulations, as we like to say.
Congratulations.
Cheerios. Well,
Yeah.
This has been, as it always will be, the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and my dear friend, Cathi Unsworth. Season of the Witch, Book of Goth, out May 11th, available for pre-orders now.